Hello and welcome to our next lecture, and this one is about functions. Functions are an extremely important aspect of JavaScript and programming in general. So, what are functions? So imagine that we have a piece of code that we want to run a lot of times, so that we want to use over and over again in our code. So we can put this piece of code into a function instead of writing it over and over again. So functions are like containers that hold a couple of lines of code, and we pass arguments into them so that the function can have some information from the outside, and then the function can return a result. I actually like to think as functions like a machine that receives some input, do some stuff with it, and then return something else. And functions are very important for the programming principle dry, which means don't repeat yourself. So in order to avoid repetition of code, we usually like to use functions. So let's now take a look at how we can do that. So in one of the earlier lectures, we had a way of calculating the year of birth of a person, which was John, if I remember. So let's say we want to calculate the age of a person by knowing the year in which that person was born. So doing it the old way, we would probably define an age for every person, and we would define the year of birth of every person, and then calculate the difference for each of these. And it would be okay if we had 1 or 2 or 3 persons, but imagine we had 100 of them. Then this would not be very practical, would it? So instead, we can write a function and then use the function to calculate each of the ages. So let's see how we can do that. So how do we write a function? The most common way is simply using the keyword function and then the name of the function. And I'm going to call it calculate age. Calculate age. And then here we define the arguments, and the arguments is the data, the information that we want to pass into the function. So let's call it year of birth. Then curly braces for the function body. Now inside of the function body, there can be as many lines of code as we wish. So let's simply define a variable here and call it age. And age will be 2016 minus the year of birth. The year of birth is the information that we pass into the function when we call the function. So once a function is ready to be run, we can call the function from our code, and it will return the data that we want it to return, which in this case will be the age. And how do we do this? We use the return statement and say that we want to return the age. And that's it. So let's now use this in practice, and then we will come back to this code here, and I will tell you more exactly how this works. So to call the function, we need to just write it out and pass it the information that we want to pass. Let's say we want to pass 1990. Now in this case, not much will happen, because this simply will return the age, but this value will not be stored anywhere. So what do? We create a variable for it. And let's say this one is for John. So we say age John. So what is going to happen here? When a JavaScript sees these lines of code, it simply stores this function in memory and waits that we use it. And that happens here in this line. So in here, calculate age, we call the function, which means that we execute the function with the argument of 1919. And what happens then is that this value of 1990 is then passed into this function and is used inside of the function body. So then the age variable will be defined as 2016 minus 1990, which is the argument that we passed into the function, this one here. And this will then return the age. In this case, it will be 26. So this will become 26. And then the age of John will be defined as 26. So if we then console log this, age John, we will get exactly that, 26. Cool, right? So let's now do the same thing with some more people. So var age Mike, for example, calculate age. Let's say he was born in 1969. And the same thing for, let's say, Mary again. Calculate age. And let's say she was born in 1948. So as you can see now, this is much easier and more cleaner than to write the same code over and over again. And this is just a simple example. Now imagine that this function would have hundreds of lines of code or something like that. So in this case, we really need a function in order to not repeat our code over and over again. So let's say what this will return. Age Mike will be 47. Okay, so once again, let me explain it. The calculate age function gets called with an argument of 1969, which is then passed into the function and used here in this variable. So 20 minus 1969 will be 47, which is the age that gets returned. So age Mike then becomes 27. And we then simply log it to the console here as usual. And finally, Mary will be 68 years old. So we can now go ahead and use this function over and over again as many times as we wish. And so you see this is extremely useful in our toolbox as the developers. Now functions can also call another functions, and functions also don't necessarily have to return something. So let's now see another example that we can do with this. So we will create a function which tells us how many years we have left until retirement. So let's say we retire at 65 and we just pass the year of birth into the function, and it then figures out how many years someone has left until retirement. So let's now do that. So again, we write the keyword function and give it a name, just like a variable. So in this case, we can say years until retirement. Once again, we use the camel case here because this variable name or function name is made up of multiple words. So in here, this time, let's also pass in the name of the person and then the year of birth. All right, so let's suppose we would call this function years until retirement with the name John and then 1990. So what will happen? First, we need to figure out the age. But if you remember, we already did this up here. So we can use this function once again to calculate the age of a person right inside this function. So as I was saying, functions can call other functions. So let's create a variable called age here, which will be determined by another function. And this is calculate age. And what do we pass into this function? And I'm sure you guessed it by now, is the year of birth variable. Alright, so what happens? When this function gets called, then the second argument is 1990 and it will be passed as the second argument into the function. So we have name and year of birth. So in this time we don't have only one parameter or argument, but we have two. So the first one will be John and the second one will be 1990. So this one will then be 1990 here, right? So in this step, the calculate age function will be called with 1990 as an argument, meaning that then we go up here into this function, where this 1990 is then used to calculate the age. So 2016 minus 1990 will be 26. This will be returned, and then in here it will be assigned to this variable. All right, does it make sense? So we could actually have used different variable names here in this, so to make it less confusing, and I will actually do this. So let me just say year, and here as well, year, so that these are different names than these ones, so that we don't confuse them. All right, and now the retirement, let's call it var retirement is 65 simply minus the age, right? So supposing that the retirement age is at 65, we simply need to do 65 minus the person's age. And as I said in the beginning, a function doesn't always have to return something. We can now simply console log it from here. So then we don't have to console log it for each person individually. So retirement. And let's now run all of this. I will just get rid of this console log here so this doesn't get in our way. And let's now load it. All right, 39. So John has 39 years left until retirement. And this makes sense, right? So we knew that John is 26 years old. So 2016 minus 1990 is 26. And then 65 minus 26 is 39, which is what we have here, our output. And let's now do the same thing for two other persons. This could be a bit prettier, of course. So let's say the name plus retires in plus and then plus years. Okay, just one space here and one here. Alright, so John retires in 39 years. So let's now add two persons here. So years until retirement. And now it's Mike. And he was born in 1969. And years until retirement for Mary as well. She was born in 1948. So let's see the results here. So Mike retires in 18 years and Mary retires in -3 years. So this doesn't make much sense. So what this means is that she already retired, right? So we should probably use an if statement here, right? So what should we do here in this case? So when it's negative, it means that the person has already retired, which means that this only makes sense if the years until retirement is greater or equal than 0, right? So let's say if the retirement, which means the years until retirement, is greater or equal to 0, then we can say this, right? But if it's not, then we should probably say console.log name and then has already retired or is already retired. It's the same. So let's see. Okay, so this works. So Mary had a retirement years until retirement left of -3. So it's of course not greater or equal to 0 because it's negative. So then this part of the if-else statement is executed. So once again, just to make sure that you got it right, first, a function doesn't always have to return anything, which is the case in here. And second, functions can call other functions, which we did here. So let's see this case here, Mary. We define the second argument as 1948, which will then enter the function, which we will pass into the function as the year parameter. So we call these two variables parameters. So name and year are parameters, and the values that we assign to the parameters, which is John in 1990 in this case, or Mary in 1948, these are the arguments. So parameters and arguments. So we pass this argument into the function, and then the year parameter becomes 1948. So 1948 will then be passed as an argument into the calculate age function. So 1990 will be the year for this calculation here. So this year of birth parameter will be 1990, right? So then the age gets calculated and returned, and then this age variable is assigned the value that this function returns. And from there it's really easy. We just calculate the years until retirement, and then with this if-else statement we decide if we want to log how many years are left until retirement or if the person is already retired. Okay, great. Now you got the fundamentals about functions here. If you want to practice this concept, you can of course come up with your own functions with your own examples, just in order to practice a little bit more about functions, so that this becomes completely familiar for you. Because this is really important that you get this right from here on.